Thank you everyone for joining this webinar this morning or afternoon your time. Today we're talking about conjointly and actually more broadly about automated solutions for product and pricing research. In particular, as the title suggests, we're going to talk about automation and the questions that people ask in product and pricing. So what is automation in market research? There are definitely multiple definitions of that. The one thing that I want to highlight here is that automation is on a spectrum between full service and DIY tools. If you think 30 or 40 years back, a full service was the only way to do market research. As a client, you had to go to a supplier, put in your ideas and stimuli in front of them, and what you would get a few weeks later, or maybe months later back then, was a report or presentation about your particular problem and what people think about it. This worked fine, except that it's a laborious process on the part of the supplier, and therefore the costs of doing that are sometimes high. About 20 years or so ago, SurveyMonkey and similar platforms started to appear, and that opened up opportunity for DIY online market research. This definitely provided a new type of solution for marketers and researchers. But one thing that it didn't do was it didn't actually give you reports at the end. It didn't give you summaries and presentations that you would normally expect from a full service solution. So you as a researcher or research buyer had to spend quite an amount of time setting up the survey, analyzing results yourself. Automation is somewhere in between those two. Automation is about you dealing with software, but at the same time getting a report similar to what you would get with a full service solution. As a result of that, it is faster and lower cost to set up and run a study. We at Conjointly mostly work with automated research. That is, we allow our clients, users to access our platform and run research fastly, efficiently, and at a lower cost. However, we also do full service solutions. For us, full service research gives an opportunity to learn about what our clients want, what their needs are, and automated research gives our clients access to faster and lower cost research that is informed by the full service projects that we do as well. But one thing that automation does not do for you is that it does not actually, at least at this stage, choose the right methodology for you. So there are multiple tools available from multiple providers. And to be able to know which one is best for your research needs, you actually still need to know a little bit about methodology. And that's why in this presentation, we're going to go through different research questions that come up with product and pricing research. We're going to talk about testing product concepts, testing claims, selecting features, and understanding willingness to pay. We're going to go quickly through an example of a new product launch and look at questions about cannibalization and pricing. And then we're just going to touch on pricing in general. The first one that we're going to talk about is launching a new product. And in this case, the most common type of research that people would typically require is a product test. A product test is about answering question of how good is a product. It can be asked while you're still ideating about the product or when you're almost done and you just need to validate before you launch into the market. However, there are multiple ways to ask this question. One way is to say, do people like it? And in this case, a monadic test is the best or most appropriate solution. Another way is to ask the question, do people like it better than an alternative? And that's where A/B testing might be suitable. And the third way, and definitely not the last way, is to ask, will this product succeed in the market? And that's where prediction markets might be providing an answer. Now, we're going to talk briefly about these three. In monadic testing, we are focusing on a single product, and we give a bunch of respondents several tasks to assess this product. Typically, those questions are about, do you like it or dislike it? Why? It's about diagnostic questions. It's about associations with different keywords, either the ones that you would provide or free-form association. It's about emotional assessment, heat mapping, and so on and so forth. This is probably one of the most common types of market research when it comes to products and pricing decisions. And as a secret tip, this is our next product that's coming out later this year. Another question that you could ask is whether a product is better than an alternative. That's where A/B testing would be the most appropriate solution. This is essentially monadic testing, except you split sample into two groups. Group A assesses product A, Group B assesses product B, and then you can assess how different those preferences are and scores are, and decide which of the two products is better. A third way to ask the question of how good is your product is to ask the question of whether it will succeed in the market. And that's where prediction markets are quite well suited to be of help. Prediction markets are essentially betting games. And like any betting games, they have two important properties. One is that incentives are aligned. That is, people are incentivized to answer correctly for questions such as, will this product be a success? Will it attain a certain number of users, and so on and so forth. The other property is that just like in any market, people will talk. And it's important to let feedback from one respondent to flow onto other respondents, especially if this feedback can convince them to make a prediction one way or the other. There are different ways to do prediction markets. The one that we have developed and used for testing new products is optimized for panel respondents. Because these people do not necessarily know what a prediction market is and may not be betting very often, it's important to first calibrate them. So to let them know how the process works. So first we ask them a bunch of questions about trivia questions or launches of new products in the same industry or product category. And if they answer correctly, we would give them points. If they answer incorrectly, we would remove points. Then, once we've done calibration, we ask them to predict, make predictions about future product launches. This is the main part of the methodology. But what's also important is that afterwards we ask them why they made a particular choice, and then we also ask them to judge other people's explanations. If an explanation is judged to be convincing, then we will show it again to future respondents before they make a prediction. If you want to take a look at an example of a prediction market run on Conjointly, please follow this link, conjoint.ly/NewMR. Then, next type of research question that commonly comes up is about testing messages or claims that you would want to put in your product. Say you have a bunch of claims such as no additives, no preservatives, no GMO, and so on and so forth, and you want to know which one will work best for your product. There are different ways to do it. Typically, they're based around MaxDiff or some sort of choice-based methodology, supplemented by other questions such as open-ended feedback and assessment of attitudes, and so on and so forth. MaxDiff is about taking a bunch of claims and then putting them for respondents to rate in terms of what's the best one, what's the worst one. And then what you get in the end is ranking of claims in terms of which ones come up mostly as best, which ones come up mostly as worst. Another way to do it, which we have adopted recently over the course of several projects with clients and now made an automated tool for, is a choice-based technique. So instead of MaxDiff, where we ask the best and the worst, we simply ask about the best one. And this really streamlines the process for respondents. And also, it led us to adopt an adaptive approach where we will identify the most promising claims and only zoom in on those. If you want to take a look at the respondent interface for that, again, please feel free to go to the link conjoint.ly/newmr. What this approach allows us to do is save quite a fair bit of cost. So on the right-hand side, you can see comparison between MaxDiff on the left and adaptive choice approach. Because we do not ask questions about claims that are likely to be the worst ones, we can actually save quite a significant portion of cost through reduced sample size. But also, because MaxDiff is not always mobile friendly, and it's not a typical task that respondents would do when they go shopping, identifying the best and the worst, choice-based approach actually has a significant advantage over MaxDiff in terms of respondent experience. And that saves time for respondents to answer the survey. That's another bit of saving that comes from the choice-based claims testing approach. In terms of setup of the claims test, nothing could be easier. You basically need to supply the claims, you would need to describe your products, and the survey is ready to be dispatched to the respondents. Now, the next set of questions that we will go through are about feature selection, willingness to pay, cannibalization and pricing in general. They all require the use of conjoint analysis, a methodology that we can look into it now very briefly. Conjoint analysis is about breaking down a product into its constituent parts, into its features, attributes, and levels. So here is a chart of a product that is a messaging app. It has attributes such as name, number of users, retention of messages, and levels such as HipChat, Slack, RocketChat would be levels of the attribute name. What we do with them is that we put them in front of respondents, mixed and matched together into several alternatives, say 3 alternatives per question. And we ask respondents to consider them jointly. So we ask respondents to look at each alternative and to assess it as a whole. And if they like it the most out of the lot, then they would choose one. We don't do just one question, we do multiple questions, typically about 12 questions per respondent, which are all quite similar. We simply ask to make a choice out of 2, 3, 4, 5 or more options. If you want to see what conjoint survey looks like to respondents, again, please feel free to follow the link. What you get from it is a lot of rich output. You get things like importance of different attributes, preferences for different levels, market share simulation, willingness to pay, price elasticity, and you can even segment your customer base by their preferences or by some external variables. But the first thing we're going to look at is about feature selection. Say we're looking at features of fruit grating machinery, and we have 6 different features in this test. The left-hand side output shows relative importance of those features. One thing about conjoint, which is both good and sometimes confusing for first-time users, is that it doesn't actually have norms. So you don't have any benchmark to assess things against. Everything here is relative. So 30 preference score is greater than 20 preference score. That's why attribute 2 is more preferred than attribute 1. That's the only way to interpret it. On the right-hand side, you see preference for different levels within one attribute. So again, here there are no norms. If something is greater than something else, then it is more preferred than that. So in this case, 3-inch and 5-inch option is more preferred than 5-inch option, more preferred than 3-inch option. In terms of setup of such a study, you would simply need to supply attributes and levels that you want to test. And that would be sufficient information for a conjoint system to assemble a questionnaire and later on provide a report that will show importance of different attributes and preference of features. Another common question that people ask with with selecting features is how much people are willing to pay for them. So in this example, we are looking at a setup of a test on the left-hand side where we have 3 features: sorting speed, size of can, shape scanning feature, and price. So price of the machinery. On the right-hand side, you would see the output of such a test. You would see that people are willing to pay more than $6,000 for an upgrade from a 3-inch can option to 3 and 5-inch can option, and about $5,000 for an automatic shape scanning feature versus no shape scanning feature. Important thing here is that in Conjoint, willingness to pay is marginal, which means that it's relative to a benchmark. So just like here, you would see that the feature that we're testing is automatic shape scan, and what we're testing it against is no shape scanner. Now we are going to go through an example very briefly of a very typical new product launch situation. In this case, it's a pharma company, which is a leader in special liquid soap that is suitable for patients with a particular skin disease. That company has currently 2 SKUs in the market, and it has noticed that a competitor has been eating into its share recently. So what they want to do is find a new SKU they could launch with new packaging that will help them reverse the trend. And now they have 3 questions that they need to answer. First one is about what's the best packaging type for the new product? Question 2, what's the extent of cannibalization they could expect from the new SKU? And question number 3, what's the optimal price point for their product? How do we do that? We would set up a brand-specific conjoint. Brand-specific conjoint is what we call a situation where you would have different SKUs. So here we have 2 current SKUs, 1 competitor SKU, and a 4th one is our 3rd SKU. And for the current ones that are currently on the market, we know the packaging types and we know the price points. So we're not actually varying those. But for the new SKU, we would vary the packaging type and the price in order to understand which one works the best. What we get in the end is a survey like this, which respondents would go through. So they would go through several questions where they would see your brand or SKU, the packaging and the price point that it is offered at, and make a choice. It allows us to answer all the 3 questions that we asked upfront. What is the most preferred packaging type for the new product? That's the relative preference score, an output that we just reviewed a minute ago. Here, slim and curvy is the most preferred packaging type. The second output is about preference share simulation. So here we simulated 2 scenarios. One is where we did not launch the 3rd SKU. So we just have the first 2 SKUs and plus competitor. And we see that together we have about 76% of the market, and competitor has 23%. What happens if a new SKU is launched? It will take 15% of the market. Some of our SKUs will be cannibalized a little bit, so 6 percentage points for SKU 1. But importantly, competitor SKU will also suffer from a cannibalization of from the new SKU, and that's good news for our product launch. And the 3rd research question we had was about optimal price point. Now, there are different ways to decide what an optimal price point is. It could be something that maximizes your share, or it could be something that maximizes your revenue or your profits, and so on and so forth. On the left-hand side, you see preference share simulation. Just like on the previous slide, we simulate different scenarios. So the scenarios here are about the price point at which we launch the new SKU3. And what you see is that price point of $11 will maximize total market share for the company. However, on the right-hand side, you see preference shares multiplied by the price point at which they're offered, multiplied by a fixed number of units in the market, which gives us revenue. And in this example, we see that price point of $13 gives us maximum projected revenue. So if we are to go after revenue, we would go for 13. If we are to go after share, we would go for $11. So these are very typical examples of what conjoint analysis can do for you, and they're easily accessible through a platform like Conjointly. Now we have just a couple more methods to mention, which are useful for pricing in general, for situations where you are either the only product on the market of a certain description, or you have too many competitors to put into a conjoint test. For example, restaurants or clothing would be such markets. Van Westendorp is a method that appeared, I believe, in the 1970s. It is about understanding an acceptable price range for your product. So it is finding two price points. One is such that if we go below it, then we have too many people who think that a product is too cheap. And the other one is such that if we go above that point, then we have too many people who think that the product is too expensive. And the difference, and rather the range between those two, is the optimal or acceptable price range for the product. This method has had a lot of criticism pretty much since it was first proposed, but that's probably because people are looking for looking to use it to find optimal price point. That's revenue maximizing price point or profit maximizing price point, and that's not actually what it does. What we recommend the use of this method for is strictly acceptable price range. The right-hand side of this slide shows output of Gabor-Granger. Gabor-Granger is an even older technique. It's a bargaining technique where you would ask respondent whether they would buy a product at $100, for example. And if they say they're willing to buy it at $100, you would offer this product to them at, let's say, $150 and see whether they would say yes or no. If they're not comfortable with $150, then you would drop the price to, say, $120. So you would bargain to the point at which is the maximum price that they're willing to pay, their reservation price. Once you have a bunch of responses, say 100 to 200 responses, you are able to build a curve similar to the one shown on the slide in blue. So what's the percentage of people who are willing to buy the product at a given price point? If you multiply that by the price and the fixed number of units in the market, you're also able to project the revenue curve. And from there, you can find what's your optimal or revenue maximizing price point. So in this presentation, we went briefly through different research questions and methods that can help you answer those questions. It is very important for a user of automated market research to know not just which supplier to go to, but also what's the right method for you to use to answer your questions and whether this method is appropriate. I hope this has been useful. Now to Ray and Sue.
Thank you, Nik. What a whistle-stop tour through such a lovely range of different options and techniques for testing price and new products. So a couple of thoughts come to mind, and I guess the first one is, who are the customers for this sort of automation? Are they research agencies, consultants, insight managers, brand managers? Who are the core customers?
So our core customers are Mostly on the client side. They are insights managers and also product and pricing managers. So they would typically come to us for conjoint analysis as when they're looking for suppliers of research, and sometimes find that they can do things themselves. But we also do have some consultancies who find just a lot easier to use conjointly, for example, to do projects for their clients, and we gladly support them.
Super. And what sorts of problems are they looking to solve?
People come to us for conjoint analysis mostly, but then what we notice is that they stay for other things, because conjoint can only answer a certain number of questions, and in some markets it might not actually be relevant. To give you an example, we have been working with a telecommunications company, and they came to us because they wanted to do discrete choice experiments. But then as their research questions progressed, and as they were thinking more about what their customers needs, they realized they also need to do a couple of Gabor-Granger experiments with certain modifications. And that was all possible with conjointly.
And just to remind the listeners, discrete choice is one of the conjoint techniques. You showed very early on in the presentation a chart which you got DIY and full service. So how does the business break down between full DIY, what's sometimes called assisted DIY, and full service?
Most of our users will want to get a little bit of assistance from us, and that's actually very important if you're a first-time user. You do not want to just have a tool and be left alone with it. You would want to talk to somebody who actually does this research frequently and knows all the ins and outs of doing it, and will be able to recommend you something, review the survey before you launch, and review results with you once you have collected data. So assisted DIY in that classification is probably our main mode of engagement. But as I mentioned, very importantly, we do full service projects because they allow us to look at some more of the more interesting things, but also learn about what our clients want and translate those learnings into automated tools.
Now, Sue York and I are passionate about mobile devices and also passionate about the participant experience. So how do these sorts of choice exercises and research tools work for people who are taking the survey on their mobile device?
So we started only a couple of years ago, actually 2 years ago, and that was already when mobile was one of the dominant features of everybody's life. And what we do is that we first build respondent interfaces for mobile screens, and then we check how that looks on desktops. So it is truly mobile first. And as I mentioned earlier, with the claims test, the motivation behind not using MaxDiff, which is the most common technique, I guess, now for message testing or claims testing, was precisely that we just did not find an appropriate way to make it really streamlined and easy for respondents to do a claims test on a mobile screen. That's why we decided to do the choice-based approach.
Super. And one of the things that tends to concern old school researchers is whether or not customers know, end clients know what they're doing when they're creating their survey design. So when customers are choosing the levels to include in a conjoint, do they tend to get it right? Do they need support?
Yes, it may actually surprise a lot of people who are very familiar with the methodology, but clients do tend to make right inputs in terms of levels and attributes, and wherever they're not sure, they can reach out and get some assistance with it. But most of the time, we find minimal issues with what people set up. And importantly, we take learnings from what people put into Conjointly. And if, for example, they try to put in too many attributes, the system will actually warn them that that's too many, and respondents may be fatigued and not want to do that survey for a very long time. So I think it is definitely a concern, but it is addressed. By basically automating those warnings and checks.
But just before we go to Sue and the Q&A, the general Q&A, so you might want to be typing in your questions if you're out there listening, is the focus of today was automated pricing. So in terms of pricing, what are the most popular methods that people are choosing to use?
So I think so. When you look at our toolkit, brand-specific conjoint is probably the one that most people would use. But it all may start there, but then they will realize that a particular other method may be more suitable to them. For example, a project that the team reviewed today was mostly about brand-specific conjoint, but at the end of it, the client also wanted to ask a couple of questions about price acceptance for this second addition to the product line, and that's when they added Van Westendorp. So yeah, so to answer this briefly, brand-specific conjoint is our most commonly used tool, but other tools are very close after it.
Super. So introducing Sue back into the mixture now. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Ray. Hi, Nick. Thank you for presentations thus far. So we have got some questions coming in. So in my mind, our questions are coming in sort of two categories, quite conjoint specific questions, and then some others comparing some of the conjoint techniques to some of the broader things we talk about in research. So we might talk about a couple of the broad ones and then get into the nitty-gritty. Somebody says, how do you handle the fact that behavioral economics research has proven most choices are irrational/emotional and not rational? Do you think about that when you're bringing projects together, Nick? Or Ray's obviously dying to answer that one.
I'm going to chip in from 30 years of conjoint experience here, because I think conjoint was doing behavioral economics before it became so popular. Because if you think back to Nick's example of brand and shapes of bottle, you can't ask people how important is the shape of the bottle compared with the brand name, compared with the price. But generally, if you've done a well-designed experiment, you can say, which of these would you pick? And we use the behavioral experiment to understand what is driving the choice. So conjoint was behavioral economics before it became popular. So I don't think there is a conflict between those. But Nick, your thoughts?
Oh, right. I think you answered the question for me. But just to add to it, I don't think there is any conflict here. In fact, I'm familiar with a couple of projects that were done by not precisely us, but close friends who do conjoint analysis day in, day out in the space of behavioral economics for government clients, and conjoint can be a tool for behavioral economics as well, precisely because it is measuring choice and not what people say about a particular feature or policy option or price point.
Okay, so we'll now move over to the more nitty-gritty conjoint and pricing questions. And we'll start off with a comment that says, great presentation. I'm interested in your new claims testing tool, but I also want to evaluate willingness to pay for those various claims. Is there a way to do that with the new claims testing tool, or would that steer me more towards your conjoint tool?
Very good question. So it would be our conjoint tool. It would be a generic conjoint with two attributes. One would be claims and the other one would be price. And unfortunately, unlike with the new claims test, which does 300 claims, or can actually do more, we just didn't test for more. With the generic conjoint, the number of claims that you can put will be limited to maybe a couple dozen in order to in order to give you a robust estimate of that willingness to pay. So yes, so you can do 300 claims with a claims test, or if you want to do willingness to pay, then maybe it will be about 25 max of those claims.
Thanks, Nik. Here's a question, Nik, and I think it's a great one, but it could actually have a couple of different meanings. So if you're the person who's asked this question and we don't answer it quite the right way, can you just type a follow-up question into the question box? So we've got a question about how the outputs are created for a conjoint exercise. Is it standardized? Now, I'm assuming they're talking about how automated is the output, but if you're talking about something else, please type in a follow-up question to that.
So it is automated, but with Conjoint, you can actually do almost a limitless number of things with the outputs. I'm talking about the simulator. So the simulator is there to is there for you to use. So you can look at different scenarios, just the ones that, as an example, the ones that we looked at previously, where we had different price points and reaction of preference shares and revenue to those price points. So that is not automated because it's up to you how you want to use it. But all the other ones about willingness to pay and importance of different features and all the rest are pretty much available once you have the data and have a few minutes to wait for the report to generate.
And Ray here, just in case they meant one of the other meanings of standardized, Nik, in your utilities diagrams, does each person pay an equal amount into that? So have you standardized the data at the respondent level when you're making the aggregate utilities that you can present and the importances? And so that's the first part of that question. And I'll ask the second in a minute.
Yeah, okay. Good question. So essentially, yes. So everybody gets an almost equal weighting, except for cases where some respondents will have pretty diffuse preferences, and some others may have stronger preferences. So the ones who have stronger preferences will obviously skew average towards their preferences. So it is averaged in that sense. Yeah, and I guess that should answer your question.
Super, thanks. Sue.
Okay, Nik, somebody notes that you mentioned that clients are able to input the right levels / attributes into the conjoint design example, and that you provide support if they have problems. And they're asking then, what sort of support do you provide to understand whether the tools are appropriate for the specific markets or types of products?
Basically, all that's needed, because we don't see ourselves as a fully DIY tool, even though you can do everything without our intervention. We are there sometimes to answer very simple questions about which button to press, and sometimes to go through research questions and the setup of the questionnaire with our clients. We also very deliberately allowed the tools to be working fine with minimal setup, but also with some customizability. For example, if people have a need to mix certain questions into certain other questions, to translate some things into 2 languages and run the survey in two languages, those things are possible. And we can guide and support people on that. But it also works the other way, where people would just put in basic settings, that's attributes and levels, and press the launch button.
Okay, and somewhat related to that, Nik, it's kind of a question about one of your other services, which is providing sample. So where do you get the sample from for these studies? Are they respondents who constantly carry out conjoints, etc.?
No. So the usual suspects, companies like Cint, SSI, and Critical Mix, and all the rest in the industry. So we don't have a secret sauce in that. Our only secret sauce is that, well, we have two secret sources. One is that we are very passionate about respondent quality, and we don't mean just the screening out of fraudulent respondents, and sometimes, unfortunately, we do see them and fight them with vigor. It also means screening out inattentive respondents. So respondents who are otherwise honest and good, but just did not perform, did not pay sufficient attention to this particular study. So we do not want them to be in the conjoint results, and the tools are set up in such a way that they will automatically remove them. The other secret sauce we have with that is about being pretty close to the project management process and knowing where respondents are coming from. And definitely we want to avoid situations where they only do conjoints. We want normal people, normal respondents who do not do surveys every day, but at the same time who are there, available, and can be reached and meet the respondent profiling criteria.
Thanks, Nik. And now here is a quite specific question. Could you describe how you interpret and utilize the two intermediate choices, indifference price point and optimal price point?
Two intermediate choices
so in the Van Westendorp, Nik, yep. There are a series of points which traditionally people have produced, different inflections, different crossovers.
Oh, yes. So the crossover between something like expensive and cheap and too expensive and too cheap, yes. So we ask people not to interpret them. We do label them, and I think what you mentioned is the label, so that are usually applied to those. But we very deliberately in the report ask people not to pay a lot of attention to those particular intersections of intermediate points. There are people who try to make interpretations of those, but we have not found any kind of a foundation for those interpretations. So there may be some literature around it, but we just let people know that the main things here are the two outmost points, and they're the ones that will give you the price range. So maybe the person who asked this is of a different opinion, and if they are, they can definitely find those points. They're labeled, they're highlighted, just with a caveat.
Thanks, Nik. I've got one last question to ask, but there is still a little bit of time left if there are questions. So if you've been in two minds as to whether to ask something, now is an excellent time to either type it into the GoToWebinar question box or head to Twitter, type the question and put #NewMR at the end. So Nik, you've outlined a lot of different options and some great tools that people can use. For people who are like fairly new to this area and sort of almost need a ready reckoner, or a way they can think about their problem and then decide which techniques they should be using, apart from getting directly in contact with someone at the Conjointly team, are there some resources, some website material they can have a look at that will help them think about their specific research questions and which techniques would work best for them?
Yes. So first of all, our website is full of those, and I think one thing that really helps people understand how these methodologies work is playing with the reports. So if somebody signs up for an account, they will get a bunch of example reports, and they can easily navigate those, play with different scenarios, and play with elasticity curves, and see what outputs are like. And that, I guess, is probably the easiest introduction into this area, where you not just read something, but also are able to access live examples for products. Some of them may be actually in your industry, and see what kind of reports that you would get for different research methods.
Thank you very much, Nik. And you will have been noticing as Nik went through the presentation, he had a link on many of the slides that took you through to the Conjointly website and has some examples set up. That link will be in the slides so you can download, or you could probably just Google Conjointly NewMR and head straight to the website and have a look at some of those examples. So that's all of the questions that have come from the audience today. So thank you very much, Nik, and thank you, Ray, for joining Nik to talk about some of those interesting aspects of pricing research, how you can automate it, and what some of the challenges are.
Thank you, Ray and Sue.
Thank you, Nik. So finally, I really just want to thank Nik for joining us today and thank Conjointly very much for sponsoring NewMR this year. And thank you very much for joining us today. Bye for now.
Thank you.